This film was pitched, actually, at 20th Century Fox because Lewis Gilbert had made Alfie, and Fox had bought Road to Saint-Tropez, and by some fluke it had made them some money because there was a thing called the Edie Plan. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Edie Plan. In the 60s, the government, it was a wonderful thing actually, a civil servant called Edie wanted to encourage British production, so he gave back profits, part of the box office to invest in British cinema. In fact, we wouldn't be here without him, would we? Maybe. And so I made a half-hour film, and it went out with a film called In Like Flint, which made a lot of money. So because my little half-hour film had a quarter of the program, the government returned money to Fox. The thing they'd paid 10 grand for suddenly earned them £93,000. And they thought, this kid, is worth, well, let's invest in him. But I sold the idea to Fox by saying, it's the female Alfie, And they said, yes, that makes sense. It's like probably when they made the left-handed gun, they went to the studio and said, do you know a studio head who's left-handed? Let's sell him the left-handed gun, or something like that. And what happened was, there was a photographer called Robert Freeman. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. He was a photographer who did a lot of Beatles covers. And he had a script called Touchables, and which is about a gang of girls who kidnap a young man and have their way with him. And I had Joanna, which I was submitting to Fox. And Richard Zanuck came to town, and he took us both outside on the corner of Soho Square. And if anybody wants to make deals, this is something you have to know. If someone's going to make a deal with you, they do it without witnesses. They go out, they do it in the street, on a street corner. And this is what happened. He stood on the pavement. Bob Freeman's quite tall, and I was quite tall. Not tall, but anyway. So Richard Zanuck stood on the pavement, so it gave him about 6 inches up to our level. And he said, he looked at the two of us, and he said, Sound of Music has just made me $90 million. He said, and I'm going to give $1 million to you, and he pointed to Bob. He said, and I'm going to give $1 million to you. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that? Can you picture that? Someone who says they're going to give you $1 million. I mean, that's just, what can I say? So that's how it happened. It wouldn't have happened without that amazing collision of asteroids and whatever those things are that happen in the universe.
Had you, before you made Road to Saint-Tropez, had you been to film school? Had you been experimenting with the camera?
I've done
Had
quite
you
a
been thinking about it?
Well, actually, if you look at it, it's actually a bit like a lot of commercials in search of an author, And I made lots of commercials before I did this. When I did Road to Saint-Tropez, it exposed me to the commercials world, and I met Alan Parker and a lot of the guys, and I made about 80 commercials for different companies. And I was watching this all the way, like watching a television show interrupted with commercials all the way through. So I suppose that was in the back of my mind, really, sort of, well, it's a rather sort of banal story without those flashbacks, really, I suppose, It's just a little girl, she's in London, she gets pregnant, and, The script I wrote, actually it's about a real person, obviously, this girl, Joanna, and she was quite promiscuous in a rather sort of unusual way. In fact, there's sort of no, quite interesting actually in the fact that she would sleep with one person, another person, and all the rest of it. But she also stole things, and one evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is before I was married. Okay, this is long before anything. And I remember we were lying there in bed, and she was telling me about her life, the people she'd slept with, and the affairs she'd had, and the things she'd stolen, and it had a sort of Georgie girl. I mean, it was a time Georgie girl era. It was the '60s, and it was and it was a slightly more acerbic, more sarcastic script that I wrote that finished up on the screen. But I got an American producer, and he was determined to have Rod McEwen doing the music, and a lot of the ironies that I thought were originally there sort of have been stripped out of it. So it doesn't really have the ironic, let's say as much of the ironic feel that, but at the same time you do get the fact that it's ironic.
Yeah.
I wanted all these sexy girls, you know, Jackie Bissett, and I had a girlfriend then as well called Gabrielle Licudi, and the producer wouldn't let me employ them. He said, no, you're having a relationship with that girl. And I said, well, you know, all the best films, the directors have affairs with a leading lady, and it turns into a big hit. He said, and Twiggy was around in those days. And so we wanted to have a Twiggy, and the producer really liked Genevieve. And Genevieve does have a comic side to her. I mean, she does have...
There's something about her.
There is something about Genevieve which I still don't quite get it, but there is something.
She's suitably spacey, I think.
She is spaced out totally. She joined the Warhol factory later.
You didn't choose her then? You didn't choose her?
Well, she tested, and the studio said, okay, she's a bit like Twiggy, so let's go for it. I mean, she set the tone for everybody to play it like that. I mean, I hope my next film won't have people acting like that, but it's fun, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed
I think
to
it
be
is fun. It's fun.
And I was dealing with the girl, the real. If I told the real story about this girl, Joanne, who was a shoplifter, who did actually keep a big trunk of clothes that she'd hoisted in Victoria Station, or was it Paddington Station, and she couldn't go back to her grandmother's house wearing the clothes because the grandmother would say, where you get them from? So she would go and change in the station. She'd pull the suitcase out of left luggage, take it into the loo, change, and she stole Gucci and everything, and Chanel, and she'd show up without a penny in her pocket with these beautiful clothes. But if I'd followed her, actually I even wrote the book. There's a novel out there somewhere which I wrote called Joanna. But if I told the true story about her, it wouldn't be so much fun. Things didn't improve for her. You know, maybe it would fit in with British cinema, if you see what I mean. But it wouldn't have really made it. No. So I had to fantasize it a little bit. I mean, but that's obvious, isn't it? This is a film we're trying to not look too closely at the bleaker side of life. Although, as you say, death and criminality does come into it.
Yeah, I do like that kind of idea that it's about making the most of your time. I think that does come through in the film.
I suppose it's something that I probably felt when I met her, but maybe I never said it to her. I mean, we weren't going out together or anything. It's just one of those people you meet around London in those days. But I suppose at the back of my mind, those lessons that the Lord Peter says to her, maybe that's what I would have said to her. I mean, I do have a little bit of a problem with British cinema. I mean, other people in British cinema.
Should we start naming names?
No, I won't name any names, especially not here. God forbid.
So it's all on tape.
Yeah.
But David Lean said, they asked him, I think it was an interview the other day, one of his, I think Jonathan Ross or someone did an interview, and he said, "I don't like reality." And when you think about Lawrence walking on the top of the train, and Peter O'Toole's swirling on the top of the train, you can see he doesn't like reality. It's got nothing. I actually do admire David Lean and Fellini and the people who want to take the basics, the clay that we trudge through in our daily lives, and want to do something something else with it. It was meant to be self-conscious. It's Brechtian in that sense, that it's...
But nonetheless, there are some moments in it that have some genuine poignancy, I think. The funeral scene, I always find there's something in that, and the whole thing of the Lord dying, there's something real in that and genuine about the experience of bereavement, I think. Well,
I hope so. A lot of the people in it are based on real people, but spun off. And I suppose I wanted, in a kind of, in a way, to use the whole thing as a figure of speech, if you like, a metaphor that it contains real things, but not get too slushy about, not get too pompous. And as you know, I'm a bit scared of what it passes for social realism. And so I wanted to tell a story to young people, and Swinging London was exactly how it's described, really. I mean, I've probably overdone it a bit.
Can you tell us about Donald Sutherland's involvement in this? I mean, he'd done a lot of TV prior to this.
He hadn't done very much. In fact, the problem was I needed an English lord. It was written for an English lord.
I was going to ask you about the accent as well.
Yeah, right. Of course. That was the problem. I wanted an English actor, you know, Jimmy Villiers or any of those guys, and none of them had the required pathos. I'm sorry to say it, I would love to have employed an English actor, but I couldn't find one that managed to charm the director, the producer, and eventually his girlfriend, a girl called Whitney Chase, had seen Donald in The Dirty Dozen, where he'd had his boy, and he said he's got this hangdog expression that sort of sums up Lord Peter Sarne, who dies and got leukemia. And then we tried to get Donald to change his accent, to speak English. Just couldn't be done, you know. And then we said, oh, sod it. The whole point, if you like, of the visual style of the film, the dressing of the film, the art direction of the film, is, if you like, to encapsulate the 60s for people who weren't there. At the time, I wanted to freeze that moment, because I knew it wouldn't come back. And that film is a very, very definite snapshot of the 60s. I made another film called Myra Breckenridge, which people hate even more than they hate this. But it's incredibly accurate about the mindset that was going on in the late 60s, early 70s. It's an accurate description of the cynicism and the way people behave at that time. And films, and Road to Saint-Tropez, which is very, very different, also shows an element of the 60s in a much more romantic way, in a much more delicate way.